Now, of course, you see immediately that one of the problems with this particular setup is that I still have to click the button manually. It means I have to monitor and I cannot make a mistake. And now, wouldn't it be wonderful, because, you know, the clicking of the button is quite mechanical, because the only thing you have to do is you have to wait until this thing turns into a red number. Wouldn't it be nice if you can automate that? And well, the answer to that, of course, now that I've shown you how loops and conditional statements works, is yes, of course we can do that. Now, the way we're going to do it is we're actually going to run a function. Okay, now what that means is basically we're using VBA to create our own little function that we run for as long as the case is active. Now the function that so how do you write a function? Well, you would write a function by creating a new module. Oopsie, that's the wrong one. Create a new module and we just call it function. Now we call it function. We have to give it a name. Let's say we call this arbitrage. Right, arbitrage, and it will have a particular input number. Now, why do we have an input number? I explain that in a second, but let's call the input number as time. Now, if I press enter, you will see that there is an end function added so that the system knows when a function begins and when a function ends. Now, for these functions, I have to add the usual RIT stuff. So let me just put all of these items in here. Here we go. And now I can start happily describing how our function would work. Now this function, I want this to be active as long as the case is active, right? If the case is not active, then, you know, it would basically clog up the system and that would not be very productive. We'd try to send stuff to RIT and you would get error messages. So for that, the simplest way to do it is you're going to just say, I'm going to operate if the time remaining is smaller than, now the total time that we have is 300 seconds. Let's add a little late. Let's not go all the way to the end because you would still get error messages. So as long as the time, and I say call it time remaining, but I meant to say time because our input variable in the function is time. So if the time remaining is smaller than 293, this is measured in seconds, and because you know, also want to have it when it's active, so when the time is larger than 0, then you do something. Now it then means that you will now have a series of commands. Now we've put an if in there, so as you know, we need to end this with an end if. So let me write this down right there so that I don't get anything wrong. Okay, so now that is basically this wrapper allows us to run our function for as long as the case is active. Now you ask me, what is the time remaining? Well, time remaining is I want to make sure that I run the case when it's active, as I said. So the way to do this is you use an RTD function and you basically take as an input the time remaining into some formula of the Excel spreadsheet. Just as an aside, you don't have to do this. You can actually get this information directly into VBA and use it. We're going to follow this because this is actually one of the ways how it's been described in the manual, and so then you can see how these things work. Okay, so now that's what we have here. So that basically gives us a wrapper so that our function is active as long as the case is active. What is the next step? Well, the next step is we want to have our arbitrage strategy here. So that is we sell on M and buy on A, conditional on this number here being positive. So what do we have to say? Well, we have to, the major condition is that we ask whether or not this cell here, D7, is positive. So what do we do? Well, we just say if range D7, because that's the entry that is in D7, is larger than 0, then what you're going to do is you're going to buy and sell. Now for that, of course, the only thing I need to do is I have to take the commands that I have over here and I just, I add them to my function. Now, very importantly, you want to make sure that you have everything nicely indented so that everything is easy, that you can see easily where a particular conditional statement begins and ends. Now I'm going to take this part out because I don't care about the order numbers. And, you know, for laughs and giggles, I'm going to take the queued order out. I'm just going to have it add order, so that's easier to see. And so basically all that they have done now is I've specified if my Excel spreadsheet indicates that there is an arbitrage opportunity, then I'm going to submit the particular arbitrage trade. Okay, so now this is the end of the first if statement. Now the next thing is of course we know that there's two possible arbitrage opportunities. So for that, I'm just going to copy this amount here. And now I'm not interested in cell D7, I'm interested in cell D9 over here. So let me write D9 in, and when a D9 is positive, well then I'm going to do again an arbitrage trade, except that I'm going to use the offsetting trade in the other direction, right? So I would buy on market A and sell on market M. So let me just copy paste this over because I've done this so nicely. And so take these commands and flip them around. There you have it. Now make it look pretty. Pretty is very important coding because it makes it easier for you to see your this code. And there you have it. That is our code. Make sure that every if statement is closed. And now we have our function. Now how do we use our function arbitrage? Well, the best way to do this is if we simply add the function as a cell. So now we can write here, you know how you use functions like summation and so on in Excel. Well, what we want to do is we want to use this function arbitrage as an input variable, use time, right? Because the time variable is what we've said. And so therefore we need to have the time as the time remaining, which is in this cell C12. So all that we need to do is we type arbitrage for our function. We take this entry here, because that's the time that we have. And now as I press the enter button, you'll see that this function is now running. And you know, you can see that if this here turns red in one of these numbers, then you should see that transactions occur, because at that point what should happen is that the system submits orders. So let's be a little patient and see if something happens. As you can see now, this number has turned red and the system keeps submitting orders. Why? Well, because they're profitable, and it does this for as long as it can. And you can see these numbers here are negative, and it just keeps trading, and and you can see that each of these actually are making us money, because the price at which you're selling, the cash flow that comes in, is always bigger than the cash flow where something goes out. You can see here also in RIT you have a realized profit and loss, and this number is ticking up because obviously these arbitrage strategies are intrinsically profitable. Now I want to say a few things as you run this. So it's easy to do by yourself when you're the only one. When we do this in the classroom, it's not entirely clear that your strategy will be as successful, because there will be between 10 to 20 people that try to do the same thing at the same time. This doesn't always work. Just be aware of that. When you do this in your private time, I hope it works out better. And with that, now you have a very simple function that you can use in order to program algorithmic arbitrage. And with that, in the next session, we can start using economic problems and solve those with our algorithms. Thank you for listening.